So this is the fifth video lecture in the chapter of social class in the United States. In this one, I want to talk about the theories and maybe move on to some of the consequences. So recall way back in the first chapter when we introduced the three major sociological theories. We have functional theory, which is basically the idea of a body, everything serves a purpose. Conflict theory, which suggests that all all societal things can be understood from the perspective of a conflict of two groups who have opposing interests. And then symbolic interactionism, which is considered a micro level, an individual level theory about significance of meaning. So how do we apply these theories to the phenomena of stratification, specifically social class in the United States? Well, functional theory argues that where you are at in the social hierarchy is a reflection or is determined or influenced by your relative contribution to society. So this is probably the one that we all hear about growing up, right? This is the idea of the meritocracy that we were talking about early in the beginning of this chapter, is that the people at the top, the people who make more money, who have more status, who have more power, are in fact more important, and they do more significant, more important jobs in society. The people at the bottom, they earn less money, they have less social status, they have less wealth because the tasks that they do are less important to the functioning of society. Well, the criticism of functional theory really is, well, one, how do you explain people who are born into this location? They didn't do anything, they were just born. And two, who's to say what jobs are more important, right? How do we define what's important? Yeah, the CEO's job is really important, but can the CEO run the company, right? Does the CEO know how to make the copiers run? Does the CEO know how to do the work? Do they even have the keys to the building, right? What is more important? And functional theory, this is an interesting one because during the pandemic when everything shut down and they started talking about essential workers, and these essential workers, interestingly enough, were people that worked at the pet store, people that worked at Menards. Often they were these low status nurses, these lower status occupations that were considered more essential, right? It wasn't the researchers at the pharmaceutical company was pretty important. It wasn't the researchers so much as it was the doctors and the nurses that were considered more important. So the criticism of functional theory really is, who's to say what jobs are more important? Nevertheless, the fact is that if I'm born into a low income family, I may have the best idea in the world, but I may not be able to be discovered because I don't have access to the institutions the institutions of higher learning. So it suggests that this structure will repeat itself. The people born in middle class will die in middle class, their children will be in middle class. And so why you're not born into these important jobs. Conflict theory, I hope that makes some sense. Conflict theory, on the other hand, argues that the structure maintains itself. This is what we call social reproduction, previously from an earlier chapter, that the reason this social structure maintains itself generation after generation is because there is an inherent social conflict between the people at the top and the people at the bottom. The people at the top of the triangle are the ones that make all the rules. These are the ones that are in the position, the social structural position, to make rules that protect their social status. And the people at the bottom don't make the rules. So these guys at the top are making rules that benefit themselves without really any regard for the people at the bottom. So the reason the people at the bottom stay at the bottom is because the people at the top are making the rules to keep them there. Right? So inequality maintains itself because the folks at the top are writing the rules and making it difficult for the people at the bottom. In fact, conflict theory might actually go so far as to say that they are creating rules that ensure that the people at the bottom stay, and whenever they gain access to social resources like education and wealth, these guys rewrite the rules, because we really can't have all of these people be middle class. So once all of these people, so an example would be in higher education, early in my career, we were relaxing the rules to make it easier for the masses to gain access to higher education. to the academy. And now we've started to tighten down on those requirements to make it harder, because the argument from a conflict theorist perspective is these people really don't want the masses to gain access to higher education, because then they might demand that the system change. Symbolic interactionism doesn't really even sound similar to these. Symbolic interactionism argues it examines class from an individual level, and really says that class is about how we be, how we interact, right? So class is a function of how I interact with the world, my attitudes, the way I dress. Class is less about where I'm at in the social structure. It's more about how I be. But we can define be in terms of my way of being. But we can determine or influence how people perceive our class by the props that we surround ourselves with. So when people buy name brand things, or they buy a fancy car because, or whatever, they dress in name brand clothes, the idea is that they're trying to present their class. They're trying to look wealthier than they are, because we know that people treat you different based on your different social class. And the same thing actually works in reverse, where you have very wealthy people who try to dress down so that people don't know that they're very wealthy. But this theory really argues that class, it's not about structure, it's not about any of these things. Class is about how I present myself, right? It's about the symbols and how people interact with me based on the symbols that I wrap myself, symbolically wrap myself around. I mean, we all know, I'm sure you know, that if you dress up better, if you look wealthier and go to a restaurant or someplace, people will treat you different, right? That's why we do it, is so that we can. I remember growing up, I had a friend who always liked to go back when the malls were things, and she liked to carry a lot of bags. She said it made her feel rich and people treated her different. All right, so regardless of whatever the theory of social class is, there are patterns that we see, and sociologists are about patterns that we see that are dependent upon where you are at in the structure. If you are at the bottom, you have different experiences with physical health, mental illness, family life, religion. We see also different patterns than when you're at the top, right? So for instance, these should seem pretty straightforward. These do show up on the quiz, which means they also show up on the exams. Physical health. We know that one of the consequences of having more money is you have more access to doctors, you have better health coverage, you're less likely to be denied services because you don't have to worry about filing for medical bankruptcy, these kinds of things, right? So that also sort of reflects the kind of clean food you have access. There are places in this country, we call them food deserts. They're usually rural, they're usually poor places where there's no grocery stores or food insecurity, right? So physical health, physical well-being is influenced by how much money you have. Mental health is the same way, right? Mental health is if you're going to use insurance, but there's also this element, this notion that if I'm at the bottom of the social structure, there's a lot, I think of it as like being at the bottom of the pool. There's a lot of force, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders that make it difficult or hard. Use up more bandwidth, right? More bandwidth, and make it more difficult to maintain a healthy mental health. If I have a job that has vacation and I'm getting totally stressed out, I can take a vacation. If I'm, however, working at a job where I don't have vacation because it's a low wage job, then I can't take the time off for my own emotional and mental well-being. We talk about family life. Now, it's not that, there's a relationship between the way one organizes our family life and our social class. It is not that money determines these things. It's that we see a pattern. And that's what I want to talk about here. When it's not that poverty or money makes this happen, it's that where I'm at in the structure will influence these other things. So for instance, we talk about choices of husband or wife, your marriage market. Now, not quite so much the case with online dating services, but the places that I inhabit will influence the people that I interact with, and that is my marriage market. If I spend most of my time in colleges, then my marriage market is college people. If, however, I spend most of my time at a homeless shelter, my marriage market would be people at homeless shelter. And it's not likely, because of social status, that somebody who lives in a homeless shelter is going to marry a high status person from a university, right? Because their lives just don't connect, and because of other experiences are different. I don't want to really talk about divorce because that data is really changing. It used to be that people of privilege were less likely to divorce because that meant they would have had to divide up their assets. But fewer and fewer people are getting married, so now fewer and fewer people are getting divorced. So I honestly don't know what the current trend is. Divorce costs money, so if you don't have any money, you're less likely to divorce, but if you're less likely to marry, you're also less likely to divorce. Child rearing and parenting, however, there does seem to be a pattern here. So if I have more money, that means I buy my kids more privileges and more stuff. That means when my kids act up, I can take that stuff away. If I don't have any money to buy my kids stuff, then I can't take my kids stuff away. I may use, I don't know, withdrawal of affection, or I may use corporal punishment. The way I discipline my children is going to be different because I have fewer resources. I may also simply be less involved because I may be a single parent who's gone or working two jobs. So I'm not physically present to observe my children, right, to watching the things that they do. Or another variable is, depending on where I'm at in the structure, the values that I teach my children. If I am paid based on being on time, and in order for me to be successful in my job, I have to respect authority, I'm going to be teaching those values to my children because that's what we do. If, on the other hand, I'm up here and I am rewarded for creativity and thinking outside the box, and I don't have to be to work on time, I can kind of be, get there whenever I want, those are going to be the values that I teach to my children. I have an artsy friend one time, and she was DCF got involved because her child had missed so much school due to being tardy. And I remember her saying that she said, "Do you know that when you get your kid to school after the bell rings, they're officially tardy?" Well, yes, I actually knew that there was a 5-minute warning bell and then they were tardy. She just thought this was ridiculous. Like, why did they not have more flexibility? Because in her professional life, she had that kind of flexibility. It wasn't an important value for her to teach to her children. I'm going to stop here and talk more about this in the next video.